Hey, Sub-Tours. My name is William Tingle of Sub2Deals.com. I would like to welcome you to this episode of the Sub2 Deals Show, where we talk about all things subject to. Now, occasionally we do cover other real estate investing topics, but it's always something to help you with your real estate investing business. Today is another episode in our Real Experts series, where we feature real investors who are also considered real experts in one or more aspects of real estate investing. They share their expertise on various topics that are critical to your success as a real estate investor. Our experts are all experienced investors doing deals all across the country who had a high level of success in one or more areas and who have agreed to share some of their best tips and strategies in these areas. We don't have any sales pitches, just the things that are working in their businesses and in their markets. And these things can work for you too. So pay attention and take lots of notes. My guest today is JJMcMoon. JJ's area of expertise is landlording. He is an investor in Northern Virginia who's been buying houses for over 20 years. So JJ, welcome to the Sub2 Deals Show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Will.
Yeah, good to have you here. Hey, landlording, you know, that is a topic that comes up from time to time. Now, when I got started investing, I was a transaction engineer. And if you look across my portfolio, which at one time I think I had up to 56 houses, and I did land contracts, I sold lease options, I did some Section 8 rentals. But that's really about all I got into as far as rentals, because I didn't want to be a landlord. That was always something that seemed to have a negative, view as far as, the typical stuff, tenants and toilets and that sort of thing. But I know you've been in the forum a little bit talking about your experiences with landlording and some of the things you do. And I said, well, gee, I want to have this guy on here. It sounds like, he's got it together as far as his screening processes and the things that he does to ensure that he doesn't have a lot of those problems. So we're really excited to have you on today to talk about that.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Hope I can help.
Yeah. So I guess to get started, just tell us a little about yourself. How you got started in investing and a little bit about your background.
Oh, well, I bought my first house in early 2001, and it needed a complete rehab. I spent way too much for it. But it was my first house. I really wanted that house. So you make newbie mistakes when you fall in love with a house. But it needed a complete rehab. I spent a couple of years trying to do that while I lived there, and that was just crazy. So I wound up buying another house in another neighborhood that I really liked, and I was there a couple of years while I rehabbed the first house, and then I wound up moving into the first house. And what made me a real estate investor was, after that 2 years was up, I sold the first house, and since it was the beginning of the housing bubble, I did really well on it, and well enough to pay off the original house. So I owned it free and clear. And several times over the past 19, 20 years, I've refinanced that first house, and I still own it. That's the first house I ever bought. I still own it. Mm-hmm. And so, I've gone from owning just single families everywhere to spreading out and owning up to, I think, 20-something single families at one point, to 40-something apartment units at some point. And, in the present, I'm kind of scaling back a little bit because I'm not sure of where the market's going, and I want to be cash rich to survive the next downturn, which we're showing signs of being in a downturn, but you would never know that because every week things seem to go up in price, but who knows? Anyway, that's how I got started. So hopefully that's on topic.
So we are in a unique market right now. It seems super hot, and we have this discussion from time to time in the Sub2 forum about, of course, where it's going, what's going to happen. And I have to say, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've seen a cycle or so come through, but I think this one's going to be a little bit different. There are usually signs telling you things are slowing down, things may be coming to a stop. But I'm telling you, the way this thing is going, it's full steam ahead, but I think it's going to come to a screeching halt and just fall off a cliff. Is that kind of what you're getting the feeling maybe happening?
I certainly did in the beginning. when COVID first hit, I thought, well, that's it. Because right at that point, we had been in a housing boom. And so I said, okay, well, that's it. You know, I mean, the money's slowing down, people aren't working, therefore there's going to be less money for houses. But a combination of the stimulus check and money moving, the values have moved. Like, for example, an extraordinary place to buy, probably the best place to buy property on earth right now would be Manhattan, New York.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you have the money to be there, now it's above my pay grade, but if you have the money, like $5 or $10 million, you could just buy one townhome in Manhattan that's depreciated since the beginning of the year about $15 million. Get into that townhome, sell it 2 or 3 years from now, and make 7 figures, 8 figures on your investment. However, it's not that has gone down, but the suburbs have gone way up. If you wanted to buy on the Hamptons, now would be the worst time to buy the Hamptons because everybody moved from Manhattan to the Hamptons. We're seeing that everywhere. We're seeing city centers, especially where there's riots and all that stuff going on. We're seeing the money leaving those areas and going to safer areas. You know, we've seen this several times in history. They've put a lot of racial names on it, like white flight. And I'm not saying that there's a racial element to that then or now, but now it's more of a let's get away from where the disease is. You know, people paid more money in the last 20 years to live close to each other, to live close to metropolis, where there were baseball games and football games and concerts and Broadway shows and so on. There's no point in paying that premium if all of that stuff is shut down. And it started with the renters moving, and then the investors started having to sell for less, which caused the primary residence people to sell for less. And it's going to trickle down. It's in the upper class now. It's definitely going to reach middle class before too long, especially once Fannie Mae opens up foreclosures. But that's who knows what'll happen. I was wrong in the beginning of this. I could be wrong now too.
And I know we're certainly seeing that. Our primary business model for the last 10 years plus has been slightly out of town, suburbs, medium priced homes. And those things come on the market, especially in most markets, but so much so where I currently live in Colorado Springs. You know, the average days on market between list and contract are 5 right now. And I mean, it's full price plus. And it's just amazing. I mean, getting a deal here is very tough right now. Very tough. So what got you actually interested in real estate? What got you started in that?
Well, like I said, when I bought my first house I bought needed a full rehab. I tried to live there. And when that didn't work, I didn't want to rent another house. So I bought one, not really to have it long term, but just until the first house was done. And when I did that and I sold the second house, now I was lucky. It was right in the beginning of the boom. I made enough money to pay off the first house completely, including all my rehab costs.
Right.
When that happened, that was when I said, hey, maybe this is something I should look at. Like maybe, I mean, this didn't happen to me, but maybe I would have made the same decision if I had gotten into the stock market during the dot-com boom and accidentally made a lot of money. I might have said, hey, maybe that's something I should have done. Or if I did that in Bitcoin in 2012 or 2013, sometimes you're in the right place at the right time. And I've found real estate to be numbers that I understand, a business I understand. And over the years, I've gotten better at picking good tenants, which I think is the key to making money in real estate, is being able to pick good tenants.
So were you interested in buy and hold and landlording from the start, or is that something that you just moved to over the course of time?
I moved to that over a couple of years. Going back to that first scenario, when I bought the second house, the one I was living in while I renovated the first house, I lived there about 2 years to finish the renovations. When I moved back, I did try to rent that house. And when I rented it, the tenants I got completely trashed that house. They had some vicious dogs living there, which I had no prohibition in my lease for. So I was never able to visit the house because I was afraid of the dogs. And they had about 5 people living in a 2-bedroom house. And when I took it over, they didn't even bother cleaning up because they knew they weren't getting their security deposit back because that was too low. And the place was completely trashed. And I lost probably a few $1,000s just cleaning up and repairing after their deposit. You know,
Right.
I lost it.
Mhm.
So, you know, it was an eye-opening experience. I didn't want to repeat that again. But when I kept seeing the values going up and up and up, and I realized that there were some other neighborhoods that were getting rehabbed and I could get in on that, that's when I went whole horse into it.
Right.
And I had, I think, 22 or 25 houses at one point. And I did that for a couple of years, and then I sold them off. And I was lucky again that I got out in the summer of '06. I sold my last one there. And that's when things really started to turn around for the bad for housing values. And then in '08, everything crashed. And I was very happy that I only owned one rental property at that point.
Mhm.
So when you get lucky twice in a row like that, once gets you in, the second gets you out, you have to reevaluate everything very closely.
Right. You know, you mentioned something about your first tenants and the bad experience, and that you didn't have certain provisions for pets and that sort of thing. You know, I've learned over the years, and I guess this is the same for anybody that stays in the business. Experience teaches you, and your leases, your contracts, everything constantly evolve. I always tell people, anytime you look at another investor's lease or their contract and you see an unusual clause in there, you can bet they've had an experience prompted that to be there.
Absolutely. I have an addendum on all my leases that I don't include it in the lease because, not in my case, but I've heard of things like that being ruled out when they went to court. And I didn't want a judge to be able to rule the whole lease invalid. So it's what I call my idiot addendum.
Mhm.
And it has stuff like no hot tubs on the porches, no massive fish tanks, no snakes over 2 feet and never out of a cage, and no, there's a whole lot of different ones. No parties with more than 10 people on the deck.
Right.
But it goes on for 4 pages. And literally every year or every time I hear of something, I go back to my computer and I add it to the addendum. So the addendum gets longer and longer every year.
Oh yeah.
And tenants will often laugh at some of this going, why is that? Have you had a problem with a snake? I said, yeah, somebody lost a snake in an apartment. And guess where it went? Another apartment.
Right. Yeah.
And that tenant actually sued me. She didn't need to sue me. I offered to let her out, but she sued me anyway to make sure I couldn't screw her around on the next lease, you know,
Right.
on her deposit. But she sued to get out because of unsafe conditions. And I told you, well, I'll let you out. The next thing I know, she moves out and sues me to get out. It's one of those interesting situations. I went to the court and I said, Judge, she's out. I don't know why I'm being sued. And so he dismissed the case. But anyway, yeah, there was a 6-foot Burmese python that came out of one of her air conditioning vents.
Oh wow. That had to be a great experience.
Oh yeah. Especially since we never figured out how he got from the HVAC system of the upstairs unit to the HVAC system of the downstairs. The only way they connect is outside.
Yeah.
Don't know how that happens. One of life's great mysteries. My feeling is that it didn't come in through the HVAC system downstairs, came in some other way, and she didn't want to say what that was, but you know.
Absolutely. So tell me, JJ, so how do you attract good tenants for your properties?
Okay, well, the first thing I do is I always get a really good feel for what the market rate is on the property. Now, if you go to real estate seminars, I've been to many because I try to learn something all the time. I make sure I go to at least one or two, at least virtually every year. So if you go to real estate seminars, I hear the same story all the time. What's the market rent? Charge that market rent. So if your market rent for a place, let's say, is $1,500, they want you to charge $1,500. I never do that. I always take 10% off. So if market rate's $1,500, I charge $1,350. If you charge too little, you won't get more tenants. You'll get people thinking it's a scam or something's wrong with it, or they will look too closely at it and find things wrong, and it'd be more difficult. But 10% seems to be the sweet spot, at least in my markets where I rent. So $1,350 for a $1,500 item, people will show up. Out of those people, I first I screen them myself because it's cheaper. I do a whole lot of things just to see if their personality is going to fit in there. And mainly I'm looking for somebody who's honest. And this may sound bad, so let me explain. Compliant. When I say compliant, I'm looking for somebody that if I mention, hey, you're not supposed to have a satellite dish mounted to the side of the building, can you remove it, please? They will. I'm not looking for somebody who argues with me over whether or not they are allowed to keep a satellite dish and if it's illegal and if they're going to sue me. So if I get an email response and I ask somebody, okay, I need your phone number so I can call you because I need to talk to you, and somebody says, I don't like to do things over the phone, they're out. I don't rent to them.
Right.
I don't care how unreasonable they think that is. If you're not willing to give me your phone number when I'm going to be your landlord, I'm not willing to rent to you. And that's just how it is. If I call you and you don't take the call and you start texting me, you're out. I know you know how to text. I will ask you things for text if I need to, but you need to have a conversation with me. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but compliance is number one. Two is communication. I need to be able to hear how you communicate. Now, if you're disabled and you can't communicate with me, I'm not going to discriminate with you based on your disability. I'm going to instead try to learn how to best communicate with you. And in my 10 years as landlord, I've never had somebody who I could not effectively communicate verbally with, even if they had a stutter. But I need to hear your voice because I need to know you're honest, which is rule number one, right? These are my screening techniques. If you're serious and an honest person and you actually have a good job that you can back up and you're not a heroin addict or a former heroin addict with a criminal history, if that's really you as you're representing yourself, then you should have no problems talking to me over the phone about it. And if you're not serious about it, then you're wasting my time and it's a waste of your time. I'm not interested in your text message explanations on why you're robbing 40 people while you had a drug problem 6 months ago is not going to affect your tenure in my lease. I have policies, and there's certain properties that maybe that wouldn't affect your ability to rent one of those properties. But I also have other properties where, no, I'm not going to put somebody who has a history of robbery and larceny and drug use and drug busts into those apartments. I'm sorry. If you think that's unreasonable, I don't care. It's not against the law for me to discriminate based on that, and I will. And I come right out with it. I say, I'm sorry, but you don't match the qualifications for that apartment. I'm sorry. Do I come across as completely harsh here? Because I'm trying to give honest.
No, not at all. And in fact, I was going to say, I don't think there's anything that sounds bad about compliance. You know, I teach my students all the time. We don't rent anymore. I stopped doing that several years ago, but we do sell houses. And, you know, much like you, when you get a tenant, you want to keep them long term.
Yeah.
When we sell a house, we want that person to stay and continue to pay us. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you landlord or whether you sell with seller financing. You want people to stay and pay. And one of the things that we do to establish that we're going to be dealing with people that will follow directions is we make them jump through some hoops before they can get us on the phone to talk to us. They have, you know, they listen to a recording, they drive by the house, they get the flyer in the window that's got the number to call us directly. That ensures that they have already seen the house, they've walked around the outside, they know the neighborhood, so they don't have to ask me a bunch of crazy questions about the house when they call me. They've already seen these things.
Right.
So I get totally what you're saying, and it's not about trying to control them so much as it is a screening process, part of the process of learning who you're dealing with. You know, so I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I have mixed feelings about what you just mentioned with making them jump through some hoops. I have, on the one end, I am with you. And I think that may be because I've been in this so long. You learn what works. And when things change, you're slow to change because you learned this works 15 years ago. Maybe 10 years later, it doesn't. because I have to say in the last 2 to 3 years especially, I have run into a lot of resistance about my phone policy, that I must have a phone conversation with you. And I have talked to people outside of the rental relationship where they've said, yeah, I think that's unreasonable. If you want to talk to me, I'm going to think maybe there's something creepy going on, or you want to sell me something. And I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
So I am gravitating towards, here's a website that has pictures, that has all the information. Go there first, make sure you know what we're talking about, and then we talk, or then we text, or then we email, or then you apply. I have thought about that. I'm kind of in between that right now, though. But there is some validation to that.
And I think part of that is just overall how society has changed. Young people have come up wanting to text and not call. They'll text for hours and hours and hours.
Right.
And I even have this conversation with my wife from time to time. She'll text her friends, and they'll have a 20-minute text-a-thon when what could be handled in 2 minutes on the phone. And I say, why? Get it done. Get on the phone, dial them up, speak, and get off the phone. I don't know why people are that way now, but again, I think part of it for me is that I know when I put a buyer in place, it's going to be a relationship for probably 2, 3, 4 years before they get a new loan, and I feel like I'm in control of that. It's my house they want to buy. So fair or unfair, I know I'm sure you're on the same page with that. It's your apartment, it's your house, it's your rules. But I think society's changed with they don't want to interact too much. They don't want to communicate very directly anymore.
Now I will add to what I just said, since I kind of seem like the jerk right now with my policies. There's a flip side to that. You can't just be the authoritative, hey, it's my house, my rules kind of guy. I mean, I am that way about certain things. There are lines I can't cross, especially because I need to make sure the lines are the same for everybody.
Right.
On a moral and legal level, I am very concerned with discrimination. I would never discriminate based on race or color or where you come from. I don't care about any of that. I'm only concerned on where your green comes from.
That's right.
Are you going to pay me? Are you going to pay me in full, on time, and without any drama? When there's drama and no money, I'm not interested in that. Drama doesn't pay my banknotes any more than it's going to pay your rent. So,
I agree.
Just to preface that. But the other side of it is that I'm extremely fair with my tenants. And I established that right from the beginning. Most landlords in Richmond, Virginia, which is where right now all of my rentals are, not in Northern Virginia, in Richmond, Virginia. Right now, the standard for most landlords is to charge an application fee. And I think that's the hurdles you're talking about. If somebody's willing to charge an application fee, they're serious about renting the place.
Right.
And I get that. And yes, it would be an extra income stream for me. But I was charged application fees back when I rented, and I always thought it was a ripoff. I never liked it. They would let me apply for apartments that they had no intention of renting to me for, and I never got that feedback. I always felt bad about it, and while I never acted on it, I could understand why somebody would maybe want to return and vandalize the property at worst, or do something else, or tell people that I'm unreasonable and ripping people off with an application fee. So I don't feel good about taking that. However, on the flip side of it, it does cost me money to run your background check and make sure that you're not lying to me and that your credit's good and that you didn't have a criminal record and so on. So what I do is, and it has to be informal because I can't figure out a way to really get this to be fair to all parties, is I tell people, I said, look, the application fee is $60 because that's what it's going to cost me to make sure you're telling the truth. However, if you're telling the truth, I'm going to credit that to your first month's rent. And that way they know I'm fair with them. And there are a lot of other things I do while people are there. Like, for example, I have a building that's under construction right now. And there are a lot of long-term tenants in there that are good tenants. And I don't want to drive them away. Yet I don't really like having vacancies while I renovate. And so what I do is I work with the tenant and I say, look, right now you have a really rundown unit. There's no dishwasher. There's no over-the-range microwave. All your appliances are old. You've got nasty cabinets that have been there 30 years. You know, you could have an upgraded apartment if you'll move out for 3 weeks and let me renovate it. If you do that, not only will your rent stay the same for the rest of your lease, which is mostly a year left, but on the next lease, I'll guarantee it doesn't go up any more than $100 or 10% of your rental in that place. And because I already rent lower than market rents, they know that fixed up the unit would probably be a $1,500 unit, but they're getting that for $1,100, and they know this. So it encourages them to stay longer. And the only place you lose your money on as being a landlord, if you've bought correctly, and that's a whole different lesson, is when people move out. You got to deal with showing the place. You got to deal with running backgrounds. You got to deal with possibility of crime, of people knowing a unit is empty. You got to deal with people complaining, coming in, and then they get in a fight with the next door tenant over parking space, and now they hate each other. And they're vandalizing each other's units to make it look like they did it. I mean, I have had to deal with all of those situations before. That is where I lose money. I want them in there a long time. I'm not after an extra $50 a month. I'm after good tenants that pay in full, on time, every month, no drama. You know, if something breaks, they'll fix it unless it's bad. Or that's what I want. And most of these tenants, I don't even hear from for 2 years. And when I do, it's usually something really minor or something I do have to fix, like a roof.
The Sub2 Deals Show with your host, Sub2 expert William Tingle. We'll be right back. Have you ever had a seller give you a house? It's a pretty awesome experience. If a seller wanted to give you a house today, would you know what needed to be done to make the deal happen? Would you like to learn how? The Ultimate Sub2 Guidebook will show you exactly what you need to get those deeds and sell those houses with seller financing. Join the thousands of other investors across the country who learned how to get the deed with the Ultimate Sub2 Guidebook. Get the Ultimate Sub2 Guidebook today at sub2deals.com. Back to the show, the Sub2 Deals Show with your host, Sub2 expert William Tingle.
So you said you initially screen them yourself, talk to them, and that sort of thing. But you do use a service beyond that point. You don't.
Not at all. Not now. Well, I don't. I thought you were asking me property managers.
No. That's later. We'll get to that. But for right now, when you're during the screening process, you do use a service or a company.
Yes, in Virginia, I'm a what's called in Virginia. They're licensed private investigators, and they're carded private investigators. They're both the same thing, basically, except a licensed private investigator has paid several $1,000s in fees to the state to have a business license.
Right.
I don't have that, but I am carded, which allows me to do PI stuff for myself in Virginia. Now, every state's different. That allows me to skip trace. That allows me to background. That allows me to do a lot of stuff without being prosecuted for stalking.
Right.
Virginia is one of the more stricter states on PIs. So I am a carded PI. However, it's more efficient money-wise for me to not subscribe to services that allow me to skip trace and do all that other stuff. It's more efficient for me to just go to a specific site like Background Finder or Tenant Finder or TenantScreener.com. And you know, the URLs change every week sometimes. So every year I may use a different service. But I look for services that verify a person is who they say they are. I personally see their ID and verify that it's good with DMV, but that's all DMV will tell me without a subscription. So then I use these other services that tell me credit, tell me income, tell me that they're verified, tell me that, yes, they're not lying to me, tell me that, yes, their social security number is correct. Because I've had tenants, again, going to compliance where they say, I'm not giving you my social security. Really? When you apply for a card, you give a social security number? It's a loan. Guess what? I'm giving you a loan, you know, and, you know, so yes, a variety of ways I do that.
So what do you think is the most important part of the screening process? The part where you deal with them directly or verifying all of these other facts? Do you feel like there's one part that's more important than the next?
Well, most of the people that look at my tenants don't make it past the first stage, which is where I screen them.
Right.
And, that may be some, like I said earlier, that may be some of my needing to adapt to change. But I read a lot more out of a person when I'm talking to them, especially if I can see them while I'm talking to them, than I do via text message. Anybody can copy and paste something into a text message, tell me the right thing. But if I ask somebody and they hesitate, I know there's something there, or there might be something there, or there could just be nervousness talking to a landlord, which is really the best reaction I could have, is if somebody's actually nervous about talking to a landlord. I hope they're thinking, I hope he approves me for this apartment. If I'm reading that, that's a good thing. If I'm reading, I need to tell this guy what he needs to hear so I can get this apartment, that's a bad thing for me to read. And I'm not going to get that through a text message. So I would say that's the most important. However, in case I'm wrong, because I have been wrong, that's why I screen. That's the catch when I might have, I don't know, a dose of feeling sorry for somebody. I had my first eviction a year and a half ago, and it was my first eviction in over 12 years. And I was very upset. I take pride in not having to evict people, because I don't make money on an eviction. Are you kidding me? It may inconvenience you, but it costs me a lot of money to evict somebody. In Virginia, they make sure that I pay to evict people. There's nothing, no profit in it. And basically, why did I have to evict her? It wasn't because she lied on her application. It wasn't because she had terrible credit. It wasn't because she had a prison record. It was because I felt sorry for her. I felt sorry for her, and I wanted to do something good for somebody. And in the end, I did something bad for everybody. So I don't make exceptions. If I'm feeling sorry for somebody, I pull back. I don't want to feel sorry for you. So I do the background to make sure.
So you hadn't had an eviction in 12 years. So I'm sure during the course of that time, you had somebody that couldn't pay. How do you deal with, no, you never had anybody that couldn't pay?
Not in that 12-year time. She was the first one.
Yeah, that's amazing.
If you read your tenants correctly, if you establish as 100% of the time rule that I will only, that first of all, a good tenant trumps better rent. I've had people offer me $1,800 for $1,500 units. Cash, right now, I'll give you $3,000 to hold it. Just please sign the lease with me now, because I don't want to lose this place. I never take that deal.
Right.
And it always turns out it's too good to be true. Okay. The flip side is also true. If that little birdie's telling you that there's something wrong about this person, it probably is.
Right.
And like I said, the only time in that 12 years I was wrong was this woman. I knew there was something there. Right. And I felt sorry for her, and everything she had told me was a lie. I didn't verify the application, and I let her move in before I did. And that was a mistake. I should have let it be vacant.
Right. Now, you said that you did single families and you have multifamilies now too. Do you find one harder to manage than the other?
Yes.
For any reason?
Apartments are higher margin. You make more money.
Right.
You work 4 times. You make maybe double the cash flow, double the equity. Because does everybody understand me when I say that? There's 2 measures that I use for how well my property's doing. Is how much money it's putting in my pocket every month. And that's basically, you take the gross rent, you subtract out the gross mortgage, that's with insurance and taxes in my case, and then you subtract out maintenance costs. And that tells you how the building's doing every month. And in an apartment building, I would find that is roughly double to 3 times what it is in a single family.
Right.
Okay. Now, and then there's equity too, which equity builds. I don't count what the area is growing and all that. That's too speculative. I want to know concrete numbers. So I'll take, okay, part of the mortgage is going to be for principal and part of it's for interest. How much is that principal? And I'll find that the principal on my apartment buildings is roughly 50 to 100% higher than it will be on a single family. So roughly, if you average the 2 of those, the cash flow and the principal, you'll make twice as much money in an apartment building than you will in a single family in my area. Now, that may be slightly different in yours, depending on the property, but in my area, that's usually what it is. However, However, and this is an important metric, the time spent managing an apartment building will be about 4 times what it is on a single family.
Mm-hmm.
And I tie this directly to how much of money a tenant pays. In a logarithmic scale, okay, I don't want to get too complex here because I'm saying a lot of math. If in a single family, okay, we'll do it on this end. A single family, your tenant will pay about twice as much as your apartment building tenant will pay. Now you might have 4 apartment building tenants, so that'll come out to twice as much as your single family gross rents here. However, your individual tenants are paying half what a single family is. All things being equal, your tenants paying equal rent will call you about the same amount of times. Your tenants will call you more times the less their rent is. So if you have a $1,000 single family and a $500 rental, this person calls you twice as much as this person. You don't know that until you rent apartment buildings. So if your gross rent is $2,000 for a 4-unit building, and your gross rent is $1,000 for a single unit house, you will be called 4 times as much
I believe it.
for apartment building than you will for your single family house. Time is money.
Yeah.
So you'll pay more for it. Also in an apartment building, you'll have shared expenses that you pay. In my single family house, I never include any utilities because I don't know if they're going to leave the windows open in the winter. I don't know if they're going to leave the refrigerators open in the summer. That's another thing. My apartments and my single families, I never pay for the appliances. They accept that they work when they move in, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. I don't pay to fix a refrigerator. I don't pay to fix a sink. I pay to fix a sink. Sorry, I don't pay to fix a dishwasher. None of that. That's all the tenants. But you'll be called 4 times as much for a rent that's half as much as somebody else. It's just the way the rent works out.
I've never owned multifamily. I bought a duplex once because it seemed to be a really good deal. It was an older lady that she was in a nursing home. She had owned a lot of rental properties and wanted to get rid of the last couple. Yeah. And a real estate broker called me and said, hey, this duplex is fully occupied, blah, blah, blah. And we bought it, and it was the worst experience I've ever had. So I never went beyond that in multifamily, but I always just intuitively felt like the best choice of words I can come up with right now, the quality of the tenant is greater in a single family than it is in a multifamily.
The more they pay, in general, the better quality of the tenant, assuming you've screened them correctly.
Yeah, right.
Assuming you've screened them.
Yeah. So you just confirm my suspicions about the multifamily thing. So I think you started answering this earlier, but I'm going to go ahead and ask you for clarification. Do you use a management company or do you self-manage?
I have tried property management companies because they make a lot of sense on paper. Mm-hmm. The amount of units, what they call doors in the industry, the amount of doors that I can effectively manage personally, I would say is about 20 to 25. I've had other landlords disagree with me. They say they can do 50, but they're also cheating. They're hiring people to sub out stuff, and that affects profitability. It doesn't help you with time. But if I'm doing everything myself, I'm saying 20 to 25 doors that I can effectively manage. Property managers seem to be a very good way to expand that. Because if I were to take 10% or 8% or whatever the going rate in your area is, to have somebody do that for me, well, shoot, there's no limit to how many I can have, right? I could have 500 doors. Yes. And if I'm given 10% and I'm making 20%, well, hey, I'm keeping 10% for myself. And the higher I scale, the more money I make. Except I've never found that to be true in person. Because what it comes down to is if you have, let's say, an apartment that's renting for $500 a month, and you hire an apartment manager, And let's just, for argument's sake, say that the fee is 10%. They're only making $50 a month on that door. Then maybe you have 10 doors with them. So maybe they're making 500 total on you, but that's really not much considering that in a month, 2 or 3 of those tenants are going to call them. They have to field the call. They have to send somebody out who has to do their business and get things done. 500's, they might break even. Maybe they make money over time the way I do. But here's where you lose money, is they're going to take the path of least resistance. If it's my business, I'm going to manage it. I know my contractors. My contractors know me, and they know that I have the same criteria for them as tenants, which is number 1, honesty, and 2, they have to be really good and show up when they say they're going to show up, do the things they say they're going to do, communicate with me, and so on. That's not necessarily true with a management company. Management company calls a contractor, they're never going to check behind the contractor to make sure they did the job right. They're never going to make sure that the contractor only charged for things they did. They're never going to make sure the contractor is being honest. I've been charged by management companies for appliances that, first of all, my leases don't cover appliances, so why the hell you changing out appliance on my dime? Secondly, why are you billing me for an appliance that was delivered to an apartment I don't even own? Thirdly, why do I have to call you 50 times to correct this? And fourthly, why are you still suing me for this money after we break up our agreement and I don't pay you the last of these bills over here, which were legitimate, because you charged me for these bills which weren't? Why do I have to go to court and explain all this when you won't pick up a phone and tell me what's up? Right. And the only reason they're not picking up a phone is because they're looking at me as a $500 a month landlord instead of a $10,000 a month landlord they might have with someone else who they're able to fleece on a regular basis.
Right.
I find property managers on the worst of scales to be crooks, and on the best of scales to be incompetent, or at least a lot worse than I would rent my apartments. And I know what my margins are. My margins are not thick margins. The days of buying a place on the 1% rule are over in most areas. The 1% rule meaning if you paid $100,000 for a building, you should be able to get 1% of that every month, or a 12% cap rate. Those days are over in most good areas. And if you have that, you have enough room to give a property management and his contractors 20%, but you don't. And I could go on and on about horror stories of property managers, especially the last one that I hired. They were terrible. They literally took me to court to sue me for appliances they didn't even deliver to my places.
Yeah.
They sued me for that. I don't get it.
Yeah, JJ, I think it really just all comes down to the saying that nobody pays attention to or manages or cares about your business more than you do.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. I know the example I gave about the duplex when, I asked for typical stuff, because she had a property management company. So I asked for maintenance records and things like that. And a little bit of investigating, which is as simple as talking to the tenants. Bogus repairs, things that were never done, that they mark up 50% because of their management. $100 repair they charged $150 for. It was probably never done anyway. Is pretty eye-opening. What I always suspected, and that was one of the reasons I said I'll never use one. It's just ridiculous.
The only way it really works out, I think, and again, this is in theory. I've never tested this. If I reached my 20 to 25 unit mark and I said, I'm going to need some help, I think a bridge would be to hire a personal assistant that does a lot of this stuff. That way they have a vested interest on what I do. And I can grade, i.e. incentivize that person because they're only handling me. Right. They need to do a good job. And the contractors they hire are people I've vetted because we're transitioning. Maybe use a personal assistant up to 40 or 50 units. And then after that, become a realtor myself. Because in Virginia, you have to be a realtor to be a property manager, unless you're doing your own company. So if I became a realtor myself, then I could become an official property management company. And I could hire contractors that only work for me. So they have a vested interest in doing my thing. And then I could charge other people and take on their properties. that's the only way that I've been able to see that I could scale it and make, because that's what my last property manager, the crook, was doing, is he had about 100 of his own units that were being managed by his company. So of course they got honest, fair deal. And then he had 400 or 500 other units like mine where they fleeced us on a regular basis just to make more money. I won't mention his name here because that would involve, proving that what I'm saying is absolutely true in a court of law. I would love to say his name because he sued me and he pissed me off, but that's basically the business model.
Right. I got you. I tell you a lot of practical information, JJ. We appreciate you sharing. Let me ask you this: if you met a relatively new investor today who said, you know what, I've watched this infomercial, I've been to this seminar, I want to manage multi-units, I want to be a landlord, I want to create this wealth, what advice would you give them getting started today?
3 things. Firstly, forget about multi-unit. You really graduating into the big leagues when you do multi-unit. There's a whole different discussion on that.
And when you say multi-unit, you mean how many units or more?
Any apartment building.
So even a 4-unit that's multi to you.
Yeah, I would say 4. Some duplexes would be multi-unit. Basically, anything where you have to mow the lawn for your tenant.
I got you.
Anything where you have to clean up a common entryway, I would say is multi-unit. Now there are duplexes where, you have two, this side and this side, and there's a sidewalk in the middle, and you could put it in the lease. This guy mows this lawn and this guy mows this lawn. And they'll quickly realize, hey, how about I do all the lawn one week and you do all the one? I can't put that into a lease.
Right.
If they're one on top of each other and there's a lawn, I have to mow it. They're one on top of each other, there's a staircase, I have to clean it.
Right.
So that's multi-unit. If you're doing anything like that, forget that for at least 5 years, 3 to 5 years minimum. So just stick with single family. First of all, it's easier. Your variables are easier to learn from, and you will learn a lot in your first few years as a landlord. Secondly, never, ever, ever rent a property that is more than a 20-minute drive away. Now, in your area, that could be 20, 25 miles. In my particular area up here, that'd be no more than 10 miles, probably 15 miles. Driving distance is key because if it's more than that, you're going to suffer from inertia. You will not be going to the apartment when you should, the house when you should. And you have to check. You have to constantly audit yourself. Am I doing a good job? Lastly, take everything that I talked about in this seminar or in this podcast, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm used to presenting. In this podcast, take all of those leases, like finding the right tenant, how I do that, how you underprice your rental. Make sure you do all of that in finding the right property, because finding the right property is number one. That's even more important than finding the right tenant, because if the wrong property and try to find the right tenant to go in that property, you'll either find the right tenant at the wrong price and can't rent to them, or the wrong tenant at the right price, which is even worse. Never, ever put a bad tenant in a good property. That's the worst pairing. That's the worst pairing. I mean, if you put a good tenant in a bad property, they just won't last very long. You'll have turnover and it'll cost you. But a bad tenant will ruin your property. If you need inspiration for that, watch the movie from the 80s called Pacific Heights with Michael Keaton. I mean, it's a worst case scenario. I've never had one that bad, but I've had some pretty bad tenants, man. And believe me, there are good laws in most states for limiting your ability to evict people. They're good laws, but there are really bad people out there that know how to work those laws against you. Do not become victim of somebody like that. You'll go bankrupt.
Right.
It's a lot easier for a bank to evict their people, the bank that's foreclosed on you and taken all your dreams and investment with it, than it is for you to evict them. Yeah. Always know your laws, everything.
Another question here, I just caught in something you said. What is your best way to attract a quality tenant as far as advertising or anything? What do you do to attract
You mean my
them?
method of advertising?
Yeah, yeah. What do you consider to be the best, most cost-effective way to attract a tenant for a vacancy, whether it's
Well,
single family or yeah.
sure. Well, for all of them, I would say Craigslist, without a doubt, over the period of my career has been the best
Mhm.
thing ever. But Facebook Marketplace has been out there in the last 3 to 5 years.
Right.
They're a lot more exact than Craigslist. And the good thing about Facebook is that you can look at their profile and figure out who they are. Do they have a
That's
fake
true.
profile? You
That's
can't
true.
figure out if somebody has a fake email on a Craigslist won't even show you their email address. So you're
Mhm.
relying on them to tell you the right stuff. Facebook will show you everything. And so I find that works really well too. I don't do the paid for stuff because I find if you do Facebook, or I'll give you an example. Again, this is for Richmond, Virginia area,
Mhm.
but I became aware of something called Lindsay's List in Richmond, and it's different than the Lindsay's List that's national. And Lindsay's List in Richmond is just a Facebook group that tens of thousands of Richmond people are on, and they're all looking for properties. So, I mean, if I advertise on there, I'll get 20, 30, 40 good leads where I know the person's who they say they are. And the worst part about it is screening them and their criminal records, or do they have big credit issues, which is, again, goes back to the phone call. Do the shoe leather part. Don't scrimp on phone calls.
Right.
Call 'em. If you get 30 people that look good and none of them are calling you back, you may want to watch your phone. How good are you on the phone? Maybe I leave messages where I sound like a jerk. This is the landlord. If you care about this apartment, call me back. I never talk like that. I'm always
Right.
professional. Hi,
Mhm.
this is JJMcMoon. I'm calling you because you expressed interest in my property. If you're interested in that, I do need a phone call. Just call me at this time. Anytime be good. Thank you.
Mhm.
That's it. And then they go into a database of mine that tells me who they are if they call me back.
Right.
And if they don't call me back, so that I don't waste my time on people that don't call me back next time.
Right. Okay. Great information, JJ. Hey, man, we appreciate so much you taking time out of your day to tell us how you've become a successful landlord and sharing some of the tips with us for screening and finding good tenants.
Well,
Thanks
it's
a lot.
my pleasure. If I can ever help anybody out, feel free to look me up on Facebook or email me at jjmcmoon@gmail.com.
Okay, great. All righty, wonderful. Sub-Tours, that is it for this episode of the Sub-Two Deal Show podcast. You can find the show notes for this episode along with a complete transcript at sub2podcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it. We would absolutely love it if you would subscribe to our show and give us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It only takes a minute, and it'll help others discover the show. And finally, if you haven't yet, and if you haven't, I can't imagine why you wouldn't, join us in our free Facebook Subject To group at sub2forum.com. And until next time, keep learning, keep talking to sellers, and you will buy some houses.